Good afternoon. We're going to be here for in the next hour. So we have our alumni panel. My name is Jordy Izzard. I'm the Global Alumni Relations Director here at SAIS, and I hope you all enjoyed your day thus far, meeting each other, current students, faculty, and then, of course, alumna Sita Santi this morning. It was great and amazing to have her kick off our open house today. So what's important for you all to know about the alumni community at Johns Hopkins SAIS is that they're an accomplished global network now of over 20,000. I work personally with over 100 alumni leaders around the world, and it would be my pleasure to introduce them to you in the future. These alumni reside in places across 6 continents, including Shanghai, Tokyo, New York, Mexico City, Rio, Johannesburg, and really right here in Washington, D.C. is our largest group. Alumni stay connected with one another through local SAIS clubs around the world, through professors who travel globally, the Alumni Relations Office, and affinity groups like the SAIS Women Alumni Network, Amici di Bologna, and most recently our Underrepresented Alumni Club. SAIS alumni also have connections through the larger Johns Hopkins University with their more formal chapters and through the official alumni directory, Go Hop Online. So alumni all over the world really are enjoying staying connected, involved in all sorts of different ways, and we're delighted this year alumni celebrated all over the world for SAIS's 75th anniversary. With that, I really want to get to our program for today. I want to turn to our extremely talented and accomplished group, our alumni panel here, who combined represent all the campuses, the various concentrations, and really represent a cross-sector of industries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each one, ask a question. They'll have about 3 to 5 minutes to answer. We'll go through the panel. And then we're going to really leave time for all of you to ask your questions. So please, we're an open book. We're here to help you. Think of anything you think would be helpful for us to answer. We'll do that, and then we'll end right about 6 o'clock and invite you to the reception at CSIS. So with that, Michelle Thompson graduated in 2014 from Washington, D.C. with her MA. She also went to Bologna the year before that in 2013. She's at Chemonics International, is a project manager focusing on Middle East and North Africa. The question I have for you is briefly talk about your organization and how you've been able to leverage your SAIS degree within your project management role. And in thinking about that, how did SAIS help you gain a better understanding of development?
Okay. Hello. Can everyone hear me well? Excellent. So I work at Chemonics International. We are, I believe, still the largest international development firm for USAID contracting. We also have contracts with the State Department, with DFID, and we are exploring other donors. My portfolio has mainly focused on the Middle East and North Africa. My programming has ranged from an education project in Morocco to my current project in Syria, where we're doing stabilization work in the Northeast. So my day-to-day, because I work on Syria, there's no usual. There's always something different. But I would say I manage different buckets, and that is primarily contract management and then business development. Contract management, so my direct project work, SAIS has really helped in that I made sure at my time at SAIS, I spent most of my, I chose concentrations that would give me more of a background and a deeper understanding of the Middle East, and then technical work in conflict management. And that informs how we do our work in Syria. That is in our monitoring and evaluation. It's in the indicators we choose. It's in the staff that we bring on to our project, making sure that they're well represented. That I understand the dynamics of what's going on in Syria so I can better support the project and project staff. Understanding security concerns, and everything like that. there's financial management, there is compliance, everything you can think of. I think my SICE education really suits the business development portion of my portfolio, in which we're responding to requests for proposals or tenders from donors. And that's where I think I use a lot of my conflict management skills, and that I am creating or designing programs that are using trauma-informed approaches, that are taking into consideration conflict sensitivity. All of these terms and theoreticals actually make a difference in how you design a project and how you execute and implement a project. And so my SICE education has informed all of that and has made it so that I am responding in ways that are not only technically sufficient, but also just very well aware of what's going on the ground and theoretically.
Terrific. And next we have Shirlene Yi, who graduated with her MICE degree from the Hopkins Nanjing Center in 2012. She's a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. State Department. My question for you is, if you can think back, what was your thought process as you finished SICE, when you chose your first job, and when you began the climb up the career ladder post-SICE?
Sure. So for some context, when I was at SICE agency, I already knew that I was going into the public sector. So I was very interested in especially federal work. So once I graduated, I knew I wanted to head back to DC and look for government jobs. And so at the time, for any of you interested in a similar career path, I just recommend apply for any kind of internships or opportunities early to get that clearance process going. I had to wait 1.5 years for mine to finish. So when I came back to DC, I had spent time at CSIS. Given the Hopkins Nanjing background, I was working with the Freeman Chair in China Studies, and then I was at a federal contractor working on Chinese to English translations. But then I joined the State Department. I've been there for 5 years. As I was thinking through the process, it was a lot of looking at having specific skill sets, as well as looking at how that can be applied broadly. And so I had envisioned doing a lot of work with being a China hand and then going to US-China relations. With the State Department, I started to appreciate having that broader perspective, because my first assignment was to the US Embassy in the Philippines. And so I worked with a lot of the Chinese diaspora there because of the necessary language skills. And then after that, my position in the U.S. Consulate Toronto actually was a Mandarin designated position, because there's such a huge Chinese diaspora. And that was really relevant for Chinese investors, entrepreneurs who were based in Canada looking to go to the United States. And then now I'm at the State Department Operations Center, and there we look at issues worldwide. And so I might touch on DPRK one moment, Venezuela the next, but given the importance of China in the current era, I also get to use Mandarin when talking to the Chinese Foreign Ministry for State Department tasks. And next, I will be sticking with the Western Hemisphere in a management position, but after that, then I'm going to U.S. Embassy Beijing. So it was really thinking about how I can use the knowledge I learned at SICE and the language I learned at SICE and being able to apply that to foreign policy on a broader level.
Thank you. And Carrie Kagawa has our MIPP degree, graduated from SICE in Washington, D.C. in 2018. She's the Chief of Staff at the Truman National Security Project. And my question for you is, it's really twofold. What is your favorite part about working in a national security nonprofit? And what are the top 3 most important things one should know before getting involved?
Yeah, thank you, Jordy. And it's a real honor to be back here, sitting in this auditorium, because I was just here a couple of years ago. And I think to properly answer your question, Jordy, I want to just provide a couple points on my background. Before I came to SICE, I spent over a decade in the government, first in the Senate, little time in the White House, the Department of Defense, and Department of Veterans Affairs. And it was fascinating to see the national security space, that kind of policy-making space, in that official capacity. but I think one thing that I've there are two things that I've kind of come to really appreciate about the national security nonprofit space, specifically where I work, the Truman Center for National Policy and Truman National Security Project, is that, I think I have a deeper understanding now of the kind of influencers space, folks who kind of are in the national security ecosystem that aren't kind of directly making policy, but are really working to influence the policymakers. This could be think tanks, this could be nonprofits, and they have all kinds of kind of political persuasions. They can be research-based, they can be grassroots or grass tops based, and that very interesting kind of environment that we kind of find ourselves in right now. That isn't something that I had kind of a firm grasp on until I came to SAIS, because at one point I was really, thinking like, well, once I'm done with SAIS, I'm going to go back to the government. That's where national security is. And I would encourage you to kind of think outside the box too. What other avenues or areas could you also get involved in that touches the national security space outside of government, federal government? So that's one thing. I think the second point that I have come to kind of really appreciate about the national security nonprofit space is kind of the increased flexibility that I have as an individual, kind of being outside of Hatch Act restrictions. So when I was in the government, these were kind of restrictions on political activity that I was able to do. And for someone who is very passionate about kind of advancing kind of progressive national security solutions, that was sometimes a little bit of a struggle for me, to be totally honest. But in this organization that I work in right now, that is very much at the forefront. We have a 1,900 member base that is spread out across 47 states. We have 16 chapters, and all of these members of ours are really focused on also advancing progressive, smart, tough national security solutions. This is the forefront of our work, and the ability to be able to kind of showcase that and do that on a daily basis is really phenomenal. I give a lot of credit to my time here at SAIS, specifically with the conflict management program, because there were so many lessons learned that I took away from conflict management, everything from negotiations and bargaining. These are certainly relevant in a policy and a political perspective, but as chief of staff, I use these techniques and tools in my everyday kind of organizational development pieces as well. So, huge props to conflict management, because I think it really set me up nicely.
That's oh, go ahead. Did you want to?
Well, I think just to briefly answer your second question, so the top three things that that one should know before kind of getting into the national security nonprofit space, I think I would recommend that kind of it's all about kind of alignment, right? The mission and values of the organization or the nonprofit is very important, and the nonprofit ecosystem really spans a wide aperture in DC. So understanding where the mission is, the values of the organization are, their political beliefs, their policy stances, their benefits, their culture. I think these are all very, very important as you're kind of looking to step into the national security nonprofit space. Another important thing is the role itself. Is this a research-based role? Is this going to be more an advocacy role, a policy role? Is it more operational? I think there's a lot of, for those who have worked in the nonprofit space, we wear a lot of hats on any given day. In any given day, I'm a strategist and an operator and a tactician. And there are a lot of ways to kind of come in with some expectations about what the role is going to be like, but also thinking about how to build upon that role as well. And finally, I would say that the culture of the organization is super, super important. The nonprofit, or think tank space in DC, it has, they all have kind of their own culture and their personality. Taking a look at the teams and the leadership structure, looking at everyone's bios and kind of seeing if you can see yourself in these folks' shoes, I think that's really, really important. For me, when I was looking at organizations, a major culture priority for me was to make sure that the team I was working with was, diverse, equitable, inclusive, accessible, included people of color and women of color in the national security conversations. That was really important to me. And so I chose this organization partially because it was a reflection of my values.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And we have on the end here, John McLaughlin. He went to Bologna in 1966 and DC in 1966, graduated with his MA that year. He's the former acting director of the CIA and distinguished practitioner in residence at SAIS. My question for you, John, is tell us about your journey from SAIS to assuming various positions in the intelligence world, then returning to your alma mater as a faculty member. So I guess that's not the question yet. But what advice would you have for a current student today who wants to get into the field of intelligence?
Well, that's classified. I can't talk about it. Well, first off, I think you have to want to do that. You want to be in the field of intelligence. It's not all that different from being in diplomacy or the military world in many respects. And when students ask me how I did it, I often quote Lenin, John Lennon, who once said, life is what happens while you're making plans, okay? So I sat here just like you are, with no idea what I was going to do, and I came into the intelligence world quite by accident. Now, there are other ways to do it, but in my case, it was a matter of going to SAIS for a master's degree and then actually getting drafted into the Army. That could happen in those days. And in the Army, they looked at me and said, "You have a graduate degree? You look like an intelligence officer." And so they put me in military intelligence, doing tactical stuff. And then I kind of fell in love with that work and applied to the CIA when I got back and was accepted. And in the course of my career, I've worked at CIA, the State Department, the Congress, in private industry for a while, and now back here in a sort of circle of life thing. So to Jordy's question, what advice would I give people who want to go into this field? I would say, learn to analyze things, challenge conventional wisdom. That's something we do at SAIS all the time. In my class here, it is a swashbuckling battle of ideas is the way I like to think of it. When someone makes a point, I usually will say to some other student, how would you debate that? How would you describe the other side of that? What's wrong with that argument? So we try to take things apart here. I learned that here as a student all those years ago. Second, I would say focus on some languages. It doesn't have to be a hard language. It should be some language that you are comfortable with and that you can work with overseas. I would say also get some regional expertise or some functional expertise. Now, in my day here, this school was divided up into regions primarily, but now we still have regional emphases, but we also have courses on cyber, courses on energy, and fields that are not necessarily regional based, but that cross regions, that transform the issues in that way. So I would say get some expertise in those areas, and be prepared to put in some long hours and work hard and do all of that you do in most jobs and that everyone here has done. Be prepared for controversy, because the intelligence business is a risk-taking business, and it frequently wanders into areas that create controversy. And I would say be prepared for a very satisfying job. Frankly, I never had a boring day at CIA. You are affecting events. You're not making policy in the intelligence world. So that's, if you want to be a policymaker, this is not for you. But you are rather decisively influencing policy. That is to say, the assessments you come up with, the things you say in the White House Situation Room or in the Oval Office, may be the things that drive the policy. Also, I would say, and I'm going to stop very soon, but I would say for people who want to go into intelligence, learn and practice communication skills. Writing skills are essential. They are, in fact, on all of the professions that I think people head to out of here, but particularly the ability to take complex ideas and express them in short form in a way that's simple but not simple-minded. For very busy people who don't have a lot of time, people like a Secretary of State or a Secretary of Defense, who don't have a lot of time to absorb complex detail but need to understand a complex idea. That's a skill that we try and teach here in many of our classes. Learn to be a briefer. I have briefed 5 of the last 6 presidents, and I can tell you some weird stories about that. But being able to summarize a complex idea when someone says to you, excuse me, we had a half an hour for this, but I only have 3 minutes because something has happened in the world that's drawn them off. So that combination of skills, analysis, languages, challenge conventional wisdom, communication skills, those are all skills that are pretty much woven into our coursework here. Not that we're training intelligence officers. Those are the skills that also apply. If you're going to be a Foreign Service officer, you're going to be someone working in the Office of Secretary of Defense, or you're working at Booz Allen, a contractor, or on Wall Street. Those are all skills that apply. And I look at my students, people sometimes ask me, because when I left the government, I had offers to go and work in defense industry and corporations and so forth. I came here for a reason, because your generation has a big job. This is a very different world than I graduated into, although I was lucky enough to work through the various inflection points over the last several decades, like 9/11 and so forth. I was our deputy director at the time of 9/11 attacks. But your generation is looking at a world that has no name. We had a name for ours, the Cold War, and right out there is the symbol of it, the piece of the Berlin Wall. So I often ask myself, what will be the symbol of your generation? We don't know that yet. But in a way, you faced the same challenge that the founders of this school faced. People like Dean Acheson and Paul Nitze, Christian Herter, who had to basically invent a world at a time when World War II had left the world they inherited in rubble. Yours isn't in rubble exactly, but it certainly is confusing and troubled. And so I came here in the hope that I could help in some small way to help shape a new generation of foreign policy decision makers. And my students are now everywhere. You name it, Treasury Department, State Department, Defense Department, Wall Street, Energy Department. I used to try and influence foreign governments when I was in the CIA. I currently have the US government totally penetrated.
Thank you, John. Most importantly, we want to hear from you, and we want to make sure we leave quite a bit of time for that. So having heard from all the panelists, we'd love to hear your questions. Does anybody want to start? And we do have mics, is that correct? We have somebody right over here in the middle.
Is that working? There we go.
Yep, that's working. Right in the middle here.
Hi, I'd like to thank the panelists first for coming out here. I had a question specifically for Mr. McLaughlin, but for anyone who'd like to answer it. You spoke a lot about languages, and we talked a little bit about how the world is changing a lot more quickly than we thought it would. What languages do you feel like are the most useful to learn, that you feel like will be useful long term? And what types of regional knowledge, whether it be economic, whether it be strategic, do you feel like are the most useful to kind of capture on during your graduate experience?
Well, I wouldn't want to say anything that would tell someone in the audience who wants to learn a particular language not to learn it. My point is, it's important to understand enough about a language that you can penetrate that culture. When I go to a country where I have no knowledge of the language, I can only see the surface of it, unless I'm with someone who speaks that language. But I would say, and the market for languages changes pretty rapidly. When I was a student here, languages like French, Italian, Spanish were in high demand. Now, I would say if you were, but the market changes. I would say right now, the language is in high demand, and it depends on where we're talking about demand, if it's private business or government. But generally speaking, Mandarin, obviously. I mean, the U.S.-Chinese relationship is probably the single most important bilateral relationship in the world. Russian, because I was just in Russia for a week about a month ago, and even though we can say it's a declining power, they always show up. They always appear. They always are involved. And so that language, Arabic, Farsi, Korean, Japanese is always important. I have one of my students studying Indonesian, so you might think Indonesian is not a broad application, but we need Indonesian speakers too. So I would say follow your heart on this more than your head. If you love a language and you love a particular part of the world, immerse yourself in that. And you had another question. It was, wasn't just what language does, oh, what regions? Well, I think one of the great advantages of SAIS is that we have such a heavy concentration in economics, which crosses all of these regions. And I can tell you that if you have, and some of our students love the economics, some of them find it a struggle, all of them get through it. If in Washington you can speak economics, you have an advantage over almost everyone else, because other than people at Treasury or people in those parts of the agencies that are economically oriented, most people can't quite integrate that into their thinking or their policy. So that's one thing. And in terms of regions, again, I would follow your heart on that. You know, I could say, oh, you can't go wrong learning Mandarin and studying Chinese and China. That's true. But I also know that people fall in love with Africa, for example. Some of my best friends at CIA were Africanists, and they loved it. Living in the bush, dealing with the developing countries, learning rare languages, the culture, and so forth. So I would say on regional knowledge, follow your heart, follow your instincts, and do it that way. But there is no part of the globe that the United States government is not interested in considerable depth somewhere at some time.
Does anybody else want to comment, or should we move to the next question?
A quick comment
Yeah.
on that. I definitely want to echo the follow your heart component. A couple things come to mind. One is advice from a language instructor I had once who spoke about people who are very interested in languages mainly for the commercial reasons or what seems to be the language in demand at the moment for job opportunities. And that is one legitimate consideration. But the issue of whether you know the language well enough to understand that culture and to be effective in it. And so that instructor's point was you'll have people who, for example, Mandarin, have spent years learning it, but who never learn to think within the culture. And doesn't mean you have to agree with everything in it, but you need to be able to understand it. And without having a passion for it or having that interest, it might be better just to follow something that you're really, truly interested in. And the second component is languages which may not show up on the highest demand list, but are still extremely functional. For example, I was in the Philippines. Technically, English is one of the national languages. But a lot of the officers there were not given Tagalog training because technically you can get around in Manila with English. But for people who were doing all the visa interviews and who were actually effective, definitely the Tagalog speakers. And so, yeah, I would definitely follow your passion and follow the ones that you're truly interested in, and you'll be a lot more effective that way.
And you may not know what that is yet. I mean, people come here and fall in love with something here because of what they're exposed to or because other students lead them to it. You learn a lot from your fellow students here.
Any other questions? No questions? Oh, we have a question.
Hello, thank you all for sharing your experiences. My name is Jelani Lejean. I'm from California. And I kind of just had a question about if you could teleport back to your time at graduate school, what would be a gem of wisdom you would give yourself?
What would be?
A gem of wisdom that you would give yourself.
Do you mean about going to graduate school? In graduate school, yeah. I'll give you the career advice that I give almost everyone. Well, you know, wind me up and I'll say a lot of things, but you know, what I say to people about careers is work hard and see what happens, rather than trying to think through a career path. Also, I would say, you know, pick your courses based on who you want to study with. Frequently, I can tell you from personal experience that I was a decent college student, not great, but I became a very good student at SAIS. And I can remember almost the moment I was sitting in the library at the Bologna Center when I suddenly realized, holy cow, I'm interested in French history. And it was because I had a professor who was charismatic and committed, articulate, and really engaged us. So I would say link up with, in graduate school, with a few professors that you have good chemistry with, and consider them mentors. And here, most of our professors are quite accessible, and that's not hard to do. That's my instinctive reaction to your question.
I would say, I think I had a fabulous experience at SAIS, so I think I pretty much lived my best life. But I think one area that I would wish I could do over maybe was take at least one more technical class. So I think the big one here in DC was project finance, which was a huge thing, and it was, I mean, many people found it difficult, but very helpful. Another area would be like a very technical specific monitoring and evaluation class. And I say this because no matter what your industry, I mean, especially in the international development sphere, those skills, no matter where you go, are very useful. And they are the skills that help you go out to the field. And so, touching on that earlier in your career and building and doing it in school so that you can, have time to practice and fail a little bit before you go out to the field, I think is great. But I would say, I mean, I did these things, but interact with your classmates. School is not just about going to class, it's also about interacting with your classmates. I can't tell you how many times, like I've done a number of assignments in Berlin, and each time it was, I've linked up with my former classmates. Job opportunities, they come through your classmates. Just bouncing ideas, they also come from your classmates. I would also say just exploring, traveling with your classmates is also a great experience. So don't forget, yes, study, but also, socializing and networking is very important.
I will add two things to that. One is those classmates that you study with become your alumni network too, and know other alumni and turn into 20,000 more people. And the other thing is, John talked about falling in love with the subject. You talked about, meeting with traveling with your fellow students, and a lot of people, we have a lot of SAIS couples that come out of here too, so.
That is very true. We had 7 in my class who are married to each other, so.
Building on that, I will also add making sure to treat your classmates well, because I'm sure this is SAIS, among this cohort, there's, I'm sure, a lot of brilliant minds, very capable people, a lot of varied expertise already, but not networking just for networking, and not just, and then obviously trying to get knowledge and expertise while you're here, but not at the expense of your fellow classmates and future colleagues. Because I see this from alumni from my prior programs as well as in my current profession, your reputation matters. And a lot of jobs promotions, that's really based on if people, like, they know you're capable, they know you're smart, but do they want to be stuck in like a small post with you with like 10 other people for 3 years? Will you drive them batty? Will they want to be stuck at an airport with you, like with no place to go overnight? That's about whether you're a kind person or not. So that, I really do want to emphasize that because I feel like it seems to be common sense, but it really is such a pressing factor in the professional field.
And just one final gem, I think. So I came back to grad school after over 10 years of being out of school. And I think if I could give myself a little piece of advice as I was entering school, making that decision, it would be just to be very patient with myself. Working and, working the daily grind and getting back into an academic mindset takes a little bit of time. It took some time for me to adjust back to writing papers and citing articles and doing research again. And so, I would certainly advise if you are coming back to school after some time away that, you just give yourself a little bit of space and just be mindful of that transition and that it might not always be as kind of smooth as you think it is. And that's okay. It's okay.
I want to add something to what I said because Michelle's comment stimulated a thought that along the lines of this. Don't limit yourself. That is, don't self-limit. Michelle mentioned hesitation to take technical classes and so forth. I did that too. If you may be one of those people who see yourselves as either verbally skilled or mathematically skilled, I can tell you that as you get older and get further along in life, you find out that that's pretty much nonsense. You can actually do both. But at some point in your life, you think you're limited by those two things. I limited my access to things like physics, engineering, and so forth. And in later life, I've worked with people in those fields and discovered I find them absolutely fascinating. I would love to take a degree in cosmology right now, having just read something about black holes in a paper the other day. So don't think there are things you can't do, and graduate school is the place to try something that seems harder than you want it to be or that you think you're capable of doing. Second thing, seek feedback in graduate school. I had a student come to me today and say, help me think about how I can ask what I can do better. And I said, that's pretty easy. Just go in, and this is a good student, said, that's easy. Just go in and ask your professors, what can I do to improve? How can I be better? People will tell you. And in most jobs, they'll never tell you that. Graduate school is one of the last stops on the career path where you actually get some serious feedback. And it's all intended to be helpful and to help people succeed. We want everyone to succeed. Nothing thrills me more than to see one of my students land a terrific job somewhere because it increases my reach into the federal government. Second, the final thing I'd say is, this is maybe the most important one. Never think your question is a dumb question. This is a no-fault environment here. I say that to my classes all the time. We're in a no-fault zone here. You can't offend me. You can't ask a question that seems that you think is dumb. Someone here, usually when you're thinking my question, that's dumb, I won't ask that. When you ask the question, you find that 10 other people were thinking of that same question but had the same reluctance. So never hesitate to ask a question because you think it's inappropriate or dumb or whatever. We've loaded you with advice here.
We have a question right here, and we'll get to you next. Yep.
So I only have 1 year of work experience. I'm kind of the student who came out of the undergrad and go directly to the grad school. And I feel like our grad school experience would be drastically different from those who had the extensive amount of time of work experience. So what kind of advice would you give the student who came out of undergrad and go directly to grad school? Thank you.
I have to take this one because this I can identify with this. This was me. This was me. I came here right out of undergrad. I had never even been overseas. I had only been in Washington one other time. So I came here, I can tell you now, I've traveled the world now and I've met princes and kings and various rogues. But at that point, I was starstruck to even be here. And I was in awe of my fellow students, many of whom had worked in the United Nations or the State Department or private industry. And yet I found that I could learn from them. And I think in addition to the courses I took, I got a master's degree in life and experience just from my fellow students who were quite free with their experience. And to this day, you may have heard this in some of the sessions you had today, one of the remarkable kind of chemistries that occurs here is between those who have had some experience, particularly in the military, and those who have either a limited civilian experience or straight out of school. They actually have things to say to each other that are, and so you should not feel coming here straight out of undergrad, you shouldn't feel in any way disadvantaged. In fact, it almost gives you an advantage because there's many more things you can learn. Your mind is not closed to anything. So I recommend it.
I would also add that your backgrounds, they all matter. And so before I came to SAIS, I worked 2 years at a Catholic school in the Bronx in New York, where I did their fundraising and extracurricular activities, which you would not think is necessarily related to international development. But when I first got to Chemonics, I was put on an education program because I had that experience. And I was able to feed into our literacy design. I was able to feed into how we design some of our non-formal education activities. And so your 1 year of experience, whatever it is in, it can be very helpful to your career and at SAIS. So please don't discount it, no matter how far-fetched it can be. But it's useful, and it builds your own character. It tells your story, so it's always helpful.
I would say that, just to echo your point, completely agree, because I think as an MIPP student, you know, some of the best classes, some of the best group discussions that we had were when we had that blend of, you know, kind of a little bit more experienced professionals, and then folks who are coming straight out of undergrad. That kind of blend of kind of practical operational experience with a lot of the theory and a lot of that kind of academic rigor made for such interesting conversations. And it was illuminating to watch, you know, and participate in these courses and in these group discussions when that blend happened. So yes, agreed. Please don't feel like that puts you at a disadvantage at all. It is absolutely an advantage.
I'd also emphasize making sure to really tap into the faculty resources here. We have amazing faculty and also among your classmates, and really just connecting with people. And because from my observation is that folks who've tended to have some work experience and come in tend to go into office hours more often, maybe because you just have more specific questions. But I think as a student who maybe has 1 year of experience or came in directly from school, really pushing yourself to go and connect with your professors and connect with your fellow classmates, because you learn so much, and it's an incredible resource. And I think that sometimes students who have that fresh perspective don't do it as often, but I would recommend going for that.
So we'll take 2 more questions. I think there was one back there. Yep. And then we'll take one more right here. Okay.
Charlene Yee, You mentioned not networking for the sake of networking, and I was wondering if you can elaborate on that, because I feel like we are always being encouraged to like network, 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 how to make more like genuine, substantive, and effective connections. And to all of you as well, what are your networking advice?
Sure. Yeah. I don't think there's like one set answer, but just, like, of course, DC it's DC, and then people are always meeting new folks, which is great in terms of learning new experiences and broadening just the base of people you know. But I'm sure a lot of you have been to happy hours or been to events where you can kind of tell, like, when someone talks to you if they're actually interested or not. Or instances where, I have an example. I was at a networking event in the Philippines. It was for all of the embassies in Manila, all of the entry-level officers. And I won't name the country, but there were folks who came over and were just like, oh, we're interested. And they're like, oh, but you don't have a political job right now, and just walked away. Like that, I remember that person, but not for the reason they probably want. And I would just really emphasize wanting, like, just finding something interesting about a person that's not just about the work. This is my personal rule. If I'm gonna meet someone, I will not ask, what do you do, in the first 5 questions. That's out. Like, I wanna know them as a person, like with their interests, things that aren't so utilitarian, because that's probably what you're gonna remember more in the future anyway. And then if you wanna connect with that person later, if they're gonna be a colleague, you're gonna have a much more substantive relationship, and they're more likely probably wanna respond when you actually have an actual connection on something that's just beyond their job. And yeah, also, helping each other out whenever you can. Things like, for example, when I moved to Canada, in that we're not provided housing, we have to just go and find our own rental agreement once you hit the ground. And so I had to sign something before I even got to post, and then just got there. And then my social sponsor, we weren't in the same section, and we're just talking over lunch, and he was asking me how my situation was, and he was like, I heard you've been sleeping on like a yoga mat for a day, and I didn't have none of my stuff had arrived. And so he's like, I have a spare room, you can stay here, like you can actually have a bed for an evening. But like those little things like really matter. And like when you actually care about the well-being of your classmates and then your colleagues, like I remember I will help out that officer in the future for sure. But it's people, like we can all kind of sense when someone's actually interested or not. But I would really emphasize not so much always trying to seek like that utilitarian focus of it, but just really actually having like a genuine interest, like try and seek a real interest in the people you're talking to.
Yeah, I would say, just to add to that, I could almost say to you now, look left and right. One of you is going to be an ambassador. One of you is going to be a Wall Street person. Because I think back to my class, okay? Just my class. Because your network emerges out of the people you meet while you're studying here. Just thinking of my little class, and they were quite a bit smaller then. I just wrote down some of my classmates. One there are many, but I'm just picking out some. One congressman, dozens of ambassadors, one chief of a foreign intelligence service, one senior IMF official, and one person who I call the master of the universe on Wall Street. He's basically really become the nation's leading authority on energy investments for a Citigroup in New York. So that's just a handful from my class. And for example, we took our students on a trip to Colombia in my department about 3 years ago. And guess what? The Army flew us all over Colombia. You know why? The defense minister was a SAIS graduate. So the network, it's almost embarrassing. We call it the SAIS mafia. We try not to say that too often because it gets awkward. But you, whether you want one or not, you will come out of here with a network. And that network will mature as you go through your career, and you'll be able to reach out to it at different points for assistance or to mentor someone. For all sorts of reasons.
And I think, networking is somewhat of a daunting task. Just the word networking, right? I'm going to a networking event. In my own mind, I try and reframe it a little bit. Like, this is actually a relationship building. I'm going here to make friends. I'm going here to, meet folks that I have something in common with, or I'm trying to find something in common with. I think Shirlene brought up a really good point that, genuine relationship building is what we should really be seeking out of this networking time, and not just have it purely be transactional. I mean, get to know people's families. What are their kids like? What are their kids' names? Who are they? What do they like to do in their spare time? And that way, when, I need to go to Charlene for something at State Department, it doesn't come out of the blue, and we already have a pre-existing relationship, right? So again, I think this concept of networking, I know it's taken on kind of a life of its own, but if you can really take a step back and think about it in that really kind of genuine relationship building model, I think that will put a more positive spin on it, and then give you, I think it will pay dividends in the end as well.
Networking is best when you're helping someone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you help someone, they become part of your network, and they will help you.
We'll take our last question right here, please. She's right there.
Thank you all for coming to speak today. So I guess this kind of stems from, personally, I feel like I'm in a really uncertain position right now, trying to decide whether or not to go back to grad school, like thinking about living abroad, just feeling like I have so many different types of interests. And I know between all of you, you have many moves between places abroad and have moved between public and private sector. And so I was just personally wondering your thoughts on facing risk and uncertainty within your career path, and kind of how you've dealt with challenges about feeling like the future was unknown to you.
I can speak to this as a start. So I served in the last presidential administration under Obama, and the last year or so of that administration was very uncertain, and was. No matter kind of the outcome of the election, it was pretty certain that all of the political appointees would be kind of removed from their offices. So that was also for me a very kind of uncertain period, where there were a lot of things that I was trying to weigh and options that I was trying to weigh. Grad school was one of them. Peace Corps was one of them. Trying to find some other kind of federal job was one of them. But I think in the end, I almost want to say that there's no wrong choice here. I mean, for me, it was, getting out of DC, going to Peace Corps, getting some field experience in Georgia, and really, taking a little bit of time to step away from DC in order to gain clarity on what I wanted to do coming back. And, but any route that I would have taken at that point would have been fine. It would have paid off, and I would have learned from it. And I think there's, in these cases, I think you just really have to follow your heart and really think through kind of where you are right now and what your values are, where you want to invest in yourself, and then make the move from there. And then once the decision is made, you just make the most of it. But I firmly believe that, there are no kind of right and wrong decisions in this. It really is kind of your attitude and what you make of it.
Something I learned from experience, and where I had to learn it because I wasn't instinctively thinking this way, is do the thing that stretches you. The best jobs I ever had were jobs I didn't want to do. Someone made me do them. Someone said, "We need you to go do this now." I could give you countless examples of that. And I found out that if I followed my earlier advice, which is work hard and see what happens, I would find the job turned out to be fascinating. And someone made me move once from a job I loved, where I could concentrate on one thing, to a job where I had to look at the entire world. And I remember thinking, I'm not ready for that. But it was the best job I ever had, because it forced me to learn things I didn't know anything about. And Bob Gates, when he was director of CIA, insisted that I go to the State Department for a year because he thought we needed to have better knowledge of what they needed in their intelligence world. And I had to leave a job that I loved. Turned out to be a great experience. So I would say don't resist things that stretch you, because they will make you better, and they will open up other opportunities to you.
Pre-SICE, or whichever school you choose to go to, but hopefully it's SICE, I would say, again, I agree, choose things that make you stretch. If you think you need a break from the US, feel free to go to Bologna, feel free to go to Nanjing. I think it's a great opportunity. You are learning and you're building, you're taking steps towards your education, but you're not taking away time to travel to do that. So I think it's a great opportunity. SICE is very fortunate in that we have, those options. Post-graduate school, I would say you kind of think about your risk management for your career by always learning. So one great thing about my organization is that we have continuous professional development. And so I saw Isabel leave. She's the conflict management person. But I started doing conflict management here at SICE, and we actually had like an out program where we did conflict management skills training with a middle school in DC. And it was just something, interesting, and I liked it. That has now turned into a side job for me. I am a trainer for USIP, and I've gone and led trainings at least 6 times now. And so there's always opportunities for you to grow in different technical areas. You can, whether it be like professional development, like at your actual job, or even taking some time to pursue other things, and maybe getting like a certificate or things like that. But you're constantly learning, so invest in yourself, and you never know when those investments will, you'll have to cash in on them, and you just never know, so you might as well do it.
So I'll just add and maybe end with, I've also worked on an oral history program where we've interviewed over 150 alumni from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I can tell you that probably most interesting to share with you about all those stories is that so many times SICER will say at the end of their career, they're nowhere near where they thought they were going to go. And they took a circuitous route to get there, and they're happier than they thought they would be. And I'll also share, you can get a lot of those life ideas beyond just what happens in the classroom from the faculty that teach you here at SICE. And they have a lot of different interests. I know some write poetry, some like to fish, and some even do magic. Oh, wait, in fact, we have one of those people here now.
Yes, SICE professors have all kinds of additional, and I always tell people, in order to stay sane in Washington, you need a hobby. It turns out I am a semi-professional magician. So if you can see me at the Arts Club of Washington on May 31st. So if you come to SICE, you'll be coming to the only school among those you're choosing among that has a semi-professional magician. Now, I'm going to show you something now, just to finish this off, that I never do magic here that doesn't have a point. Occasionally it happens in my classes, but only to illustrate a point. So here's what I would say. I mean, really, where else are you going to see this? So you're struggling. You've been to SEPA, some of you have been to Princeton, some of you have been to probably Fletcher. I think some of you are going to Georgetown tomorrow, is that right? And trying to make up your mind in the midst of all of this has to just kind of, well, make you feel like you're just tied in knots, right? Just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. There's one way to deal with this. Just decide that you're going to come to SICE. Just make that decision, and you'll feel much more relaxed.
Thank you, John. And thank you, all of our panelists. And thank you, admitted students. We hope you enjoyed the day. We'd like to invite you now to CSIS. There are students wearing blue shirts who you should follow and who will take us. And here's one of them. Up, students with blue shirts. Yep. And they will lead you to CSIS. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good to see you. Wow.